Good morning. It's June 19th, 2008, and we are in, I'm not sure what part of London we're in, but you can tell me in just a minute. We are very pleased to spend some time with Mr. Peter Armitage, who is a 1980 graduate of the European School of Osteopathy. He's worked quite extensively. He's worked in both sides of the pond, both in the United States and the United Kingdom. He has been for 16 years a teaching clinician at the Osteopathic Center for Children in London, and is also part of the teaching faculty at the Sutherland Cranial College. Mr. Armitage, thank you very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Mr. Armitage, my first question, I always kind of like to begin this way, is what motivated you to want to decide to work with people in such a deep way? Early on in your life, when did you have these kind of feelings?
I had an instantaneous moment when I knew I would do this. And that really was because I accompanied my wife to an osteopathic treatment. And I was slightly at a loose end. I was working in work that wasn't very congenial. And I must have said this out loud. And he suddenly said, "Why don't you do this? You'd be good at it." And I knew I would, then and there, I will do this. Whether I would be good at it, I didn't know. But there's one other strand to it, which is that I kind of felt I had a pair of hands, but I didn't know what to do with them. I had a pair of hands that seemed to me to not yet have found something necessary. And so when I got into osteopathy, it fit together.
Before osteopathy, when you said, it's kind of interesting that you say you had this pair of hands. I mean, do you have these thoughts, as a younger man or as a child, working with your hands?
No, I really didn't. It was, I had a feeling for working with people, but it didn't come together till that moment. So no is the answer.
Some people in our profession talk about the concept of a key lesion, and it has different meanings to different people. Some people have found it useful, and some people have told me that they haven't. Does that concept have a use for you? Does it have a meaning for you?
Yes. A lot of thoughts come into play here. When I studied in college, one of the approaches we were taught was an approach peculiar to the head of the college at that time, Thomas Dummer, which was called specific adjustment technique. And the philosophy behind it, and practitioners in England still use it, was that there is at any given time a key lesion, and that if you can interact with this key lesion in the right way, usually in some kind of sequence, in other words, then another might appear, the whole process of treatment is simplified. So I suppose the first thing to say was I never could get on with that idea at all. So I think in other ways about this concept. Is there something that holds together a pattern of dysfunction at any given time? And is it always possible to identify it? And if you could identify it, would it have such a profound effect as to undo a whole pattern of subsidiary dysfunctions like that? I suppose my difficulty with the idea is that I often find people talking about key lesion or lesions as if they must be a something and have a somewhere. Do you see what I mean?
I think so.
I often, when teaching students, they'll say, "It's somewhere." And I say, "Well, what is it?" And then they say, "I don't really know." And I said, well, you don't know what it is, and yet you want to place it somewhere. So what's that about? And I often think that actually if there is such a thing as a key lesion, what it might consist in is some disturbance of interrelationships, which, are very, very complex, as if my 4 fingers consist more in the interrelationships between them, as much as they do of the fingers themselves. And I sometimes tie this up in my mind with something Sutherland said about, I want him to see we're treating the space and not the structure. And I think you can almost ally those two ideas, like interrelations between what might be solid objects in the body, something like that, and the space between, which is how they interrelate. And I think we can treat how they interrelate. Well, a key lesion in someone might be the way these interrelate or don't. Do you see what I mean? So
I think I do.
Getting away from the idea that it must be, a facet joint, or it must be some definite structure.
Would you also consider in that relationship or that interrelationship emotions?
Without doubt, yeah, without doubt. And also, more than that, maybe, a spiritual level of existence that is, manifesting physically, that's very important to take account of. So where is this magical dividing line between our emotions and our body? Where is it? Who's shown where it is? No one. It's impossible to show. And I read a lovely thing once from a Jungian psychologist called Arnold Mindell, who was a physicist in his earlier incarnation and then went and studied Jungian psychology in Switzerland. And he's oriented a school of thinking in psychology called process-oriented psychology. I think I'm getting that right. And he said that the body is not a machine requiring fixing, but a spirit requiring awareness. And to me this is perfect. That's exactly how I think while working, really. That when we can become aware of things, and when we can become aware of what might be our key lesion, then healing follows. Very often awareness of the practitioner, awareness of the patient, means more than any technical maneuver you might do, in my opinion. Sometimes awareness just is the key, and I often say this to patients. They realize something, and I say, that's more than half the battle. It's not now what you must do or what I must do, but actually we're already a long way ahead. I forgot your question.
That was a fantastic answer, so it doesn't matter if you forgot it, you answered it quite well. Mr. Armitage, how relevant do you feel the patient's chief complaints are to what may or may not happen in a treatment session? Someone comes in and says, my knee hurts. What do you do with that information, and how relevant is that as to whatever the outcome may or may not be?
It's a good question, this, and I had heard it asked in another interview, and I'd actually forgotten it, and it raises something in me that it might sound a little cynical, but I don't treat it that way. On the one hand, I think it's irrelevant, actually, what their chief complaint is, and I'll explain why I think that. And on the other hand, you must take your patient seriously. So if that's what they're worrying about, and if that is what is preoccupying them, then it is your duty to pay attention to it in some way. But I think when the patient tells you something, this is what's worrying them, all of us, I think, in the profession, we're reading them, as they're telling us, and we're reading not only it, what they're saying out loud, this is my chief complaint, but also what lies behind it, and beginning to put it in a context for them psychologically, emotionally, and so on. This is during the interview. And then we put our hands on, and again, yes, I have it in mind, they have told me this, my knee hurts. But I may already have many other thoughts to sort of surround this with, and it may not therefore be uppermost in what I'm thinking already. And I think Rollin Becker's take on this was very profound, where he said a patient may come with a bunch of x-rays and test results, and that's kind of some information that they're bringing. Then they've got their opinion about what's wrong with them. And he said, you as the physician may have your opinion about what's wrong with them, but where the knowledge of what is actually wrong with them resides is in that patient's physiology, in their body. And therefore, I would always submit the chief complaint to that field of knowledge that exists and put it in that context. And so I don't devalue what the patient has said by saying I treat it with a pinch of salt, but I do always treat it with a pinch of salt.
Mr. Armitage, who inspired you when you were a student, when you were going through training?
A lot of people, and one in particular. So in some ways, it's invidious to mention names, because then you forget to mention some of... I felt certainly the principal of the college, Thomas Dummer, was a great inspiration, although I never really followed any of the techniques that he favoured or his way of working. But as an osteopath and as someone you could learn from by example, he was outstanding. And Mr. Wernham also, for all his eccentricities, was an inspiration. So these were during my college time. But the outstanding inspiration to me was and is Rollin Becker, because I never really felt at home with force in technique. I was taught to apply it and could apply it with reasonable skill. But when I read Diagnostic Touch, its principles and application, those 4 articles he published in the yearbooks, it was as though a light came on for me. And again, like one of those moments where I thought I'll be an osteopath. Yes. And I thought, I'm sure this is the way I'd like to work. And there was a kind of watered-down version of what he did being taught at the college I went to. I don't think anyone really had understood what he was doing. And they'd kind of taken stuff from the written text and maybe tried to understand what it was about and taught this wishy-washy stuff. And I saw that and didn't really feel that was it. There must be something more. Functional technique was around at the time, and I used to feel, that was a sort of more in harmony with what I wanted to do. But what I really wanted to do was to go and see Dr. Becker for myself, which I did at the beginning of 1981, shortly after I graduated, and spent a couple of days with him in Dallas, and for me that was enough. I was inspired. I realized here is the living embodiment of what has been written and what attracted me so much, and I can see someone working in this way and using it. And we had several long conversations, and at one point I asked him something about how did he know such and such about a patient. Looking for how did this intuitive knowledge and knowledge of, if you like, the real issues in the patient, how did that arise? And he said, he threw it back at me and he said, well, what do you think? And I told him what I thought. And he said to me, you're on the right track. And that's a moment I still retain. And I think, okay, I'm on the right track, and this is the track I will follow, because I had a feeling for that track right from the middle of my college career, really. And, I mean, I could go on and on about other people who've inspired me, and there are many, many. Many. My colleagues, some of the people I've grown up with as an osteopath, older osteopaths I'd met in America and worked with, like Robert Fulford, like Viola Fryman, Fred Mitchell Jr., Tom SCHOOLL, amongst others. I've probably left some out. And these kind of unknown DOs, like Dr. Lovewell that I talked to you about a bit earlier, who was an old DO in Michigan who had retired, and our study group in Detroit used to go and visit occasionally. And the old-time osteopaths, I think, had very special quality about them, and they were true osteopaths, and they were inspiring. And I've found also other people from other disciplines inspiring, like Arnold Mindell, reading his work, and how it seems to tie in closely with what we do and the principles we use. And it's inspiring to know we're not just lunatics. That other people in other disciplines have come to the same realizations. And do I need to say Drs. Still and Sutherland are inspiring? I probably don't.
I'm just curious if you're sure we're not lunatics.
Not entirely, no. No, not entirely. Doesn't matter, though.
Mr. Armitage, of all the different things that you were exposed to, how would you describe to me that you made osteopathy your own, individual for you?
I followed my heart, I think, is the only answer I can give. And I had a great... I felt I was on the right track. I felt that. It was an intuitive feeling. And therefore, I had an example, and I had inspiration from others, but I knew I needed to make it my own. And I think we make it our own by simply working with patients. We can't replicate what others do. We cannot. We can only do it our way. And it's... As soon as you realize that, I think, and have the courage to go ahead in your own way, it starts to become your own. But I did think, I loved that thing Sutherland students gave him, the first 50 years are the hardest, engraved on a plaque. And I think you think after 5 years, I'm beginning to understand this stuff, it's becoming my own. And then you think after 10, well, yeah, I've got the hang. And then there's 15, and then there's 20, and I've passed 25, and 30 coming up soon, so I look forward to more. But making it your own is something that happens, I think, call it the privacy of your treatment room and in your application of in your search for the truth. It's a search for the truth about your patient, about yourself, about the relationship between the two, about how this fits in the universe, if it doesn't sound too grandiose.
No, not really. Do you think that you evolve with your patients through treating your patients?
Yes, undoubtedly, undoubtedly. People did say when I was studying and that you get patients that challenge you to move up to a new level. And you don't know how to do something, you'll get a run of patients that require you to do that thing or be able to handle that condition. I don't see how I could have evolved at all if it wasn't through trying to meet challenges that patients presented. I look back and I think, how did you dare to do that? You know, how did you dare to treat children when you were 6 months out of college and, you know, they had spastic diplegia and you didn't know the first thing about it? How did you even dare to put your hands on and do something? And yet, they did help in your evolution. And somehow, through what they call in Ireland, through the blessing, you know, it would happen that you were able to help. And then you evolve. You realize, it's almost looking back, you realize. That developed me as an osteopath. The effort I had to make to understand and stretch myself and the experiences I had.
Do you think it developed you not just as an osteopath, but in other ways?
Yes. Because what is an osteopath? What is an osteopath? It's not someone who, I don't think it's someone who applies a kind of technical procedure to someone and then walks out of the room looking at their watch. You know, you really do engage with your patients, the whole of you. Otherwise, I couldn't work. I couldn't work in a way that didn't offer my patients something, like offer myself. And I can't say, you know, it's impossible to say how much I benefited from being an osteopath, from engaging in people in that way. I think you asked, I'm going to circle right back to your earlier question about did I ever have a feeling as a younger person. And I think if I had a feeling, it was how much I enjoyed one-to-one communication with people and almost preferred it in certain ways. And then so something in the way we work and the way we sit in quietness with our patients in that space that feels a little bit sacred, our treatment room, and engage in a deep level, that is something I felt at home with, even as a child. I had a feeling that the sort of conversation you could have with someone when both the full attention of both people was engaged was something desirable, something good, and something I enjoyed and suited me. Whereas other people like to be in big groups or they like lots of noise and movement and all that. I really love to be still and to search for the truth in stillness.
Do you have a thought as to why people become sick or why they become out of balance? Or other things that might, you know, occur to you outside of the treatment room and the grand human condition of why things happen?
God, you don't ask small questions, do you? I do think about the word alignment. I could never buy, even as a sort of figure of speech, the one would say to patients about bones out of place. I couldn't live with it. And if patients came in saying it, I just wouldn't have it. I would say, nonsense, you know, there is no such thing. But alignment is a word I could live with. And I think of alignment as being something maybe I can accept it as a structural concept. But I think also there's a way of being aligned with the universe in a correct alignment. And then that perhaps is health. And where we shift off that true alignment, disharmony and disease begins to enter into the picture. And I don't know, maybe this is too simplistic, but I think that's the only answer I can give. I mean, there are all sorts of other stuff one could say about our biochemical environment and, you know, this, that and the other, but at base, I think, the Sufis have a lovely word for it. They call it the necessity. And if you're obeying the necessity, you have less chance, at least, of being sick. I don't say you will never get sick, because time and chance happen to us all.
Have your challenges or your inspirations continued to change throughout your life? You know, you described a sudden sense of feeling that you wanted to do osteopathy, and other sudden things that occurred to you. Is that still happening for you?
Yes. Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm suddenly about to go and live in Portugal. And in a way that was quite sudden. It obeys a certain family necessities and so on, but I think it'll be a whole new chapter for me, and I'll be working in a different country with a much lesser history of osteopathy and so on. But I think the challenges I've taken up, it was a very challenging role to be in charge of a day at the children's clinic, for instance. And I didn't know when I returned to England from America I would soon find myself, you know, in that kind of a role, in a clinic that went from being a half-day or day affair in a kind of temporary premises to being a full-on 70, 80 patients a day clinic with not enough osteopaths and not enough supervision, and to be thrust into that role, that was a very sudden step up required from me. And talk about one's evolution being forced, it sometimes needs must. You'll step up and do what you need to do, just because. And in that way, I think those sudden demands on you are valuable to knock you out of complacency and thinking you know what you're doing, and make you realize you don't, and you better wise up and learn some more and focus more and be more astute and generally improve yourself. So yeah, sometimes it is sudden. So much the better. I prefer it that way.
How does, Mr. Armitage, how does information come into your awareness, really, with a patient? Is it coming through your hands, through organs, through the airspace? Could you try and put into words how information assembles to you?
That's a good one. I was really helped by being told very early in my training that the visit of the patient begins as soon as they come through the door. Not even the door of the treatment room, but the front door. And you can start listening and observing and right from that moment, and you should. And I think if you have that in mind, it frees you to allow perception from all kinds of angles and channels. And I think we're all equipped in ways that perhaps bias us more towards information being received in such and such a way or a different way. Like some people will visualize very strongly, others may hear things, smell, others rely more on touch and movement. Or there are other ways as well. And I try to allow it all in as broad a way as possible. So it means looking right from the word go, or even when the patient's on the phone, being open to the idea that you can learn something from their voice, from what they're saying, or other channels that I don't even feel we can analyze. It's kind of direct knowledge that just comes to you. And this surprises me at times, and then I think, well, it's a natural process. It's something natural. And so another very valuable thing I took from Arnold Mindell was don't throw away perceptions. And he called them litter in your mental environment if you've thrown them away. It's like you've dishonored them. And he said if you dishonor what you are feeling or perceiving, it's like you've stopped believing yourself, and pretty soon you'll stop loving yourself as well. And it's just, that's the truth of it. If we don't honor what we perceive, we've lost these golden opportunities that are just being handed to us. So I sort of think, in answer to your question, that it's a bit irrelevant if I tell you how I perceive, because it won't fit with anyone else. But I'd love to talk about it a bit more if you like. And because it's so fascinating. How is it that after some years at the children's clinic, I would sometimes find I just go towards a table where there's a child and the practitioner there, student, and I know already what's to be done. I don't know how that is. I really don't. And I don't, furthermore, I don't think you benefit from forcing yourself to try to develop that. I think it has to come naturally in its own pace and its own time. And the more you try, the less it would occur. So it's best to just let it be and let it come to you. Like we're always saying in voluntary mechanism work, to allow perception to come through to you. And I do feel here is where the perceptions come to. I feel we've got I'll speak for myself, I've got a still center, which is where perception arrives to be acknowledged and later understood. But I think it's good to perceive it whole, entire, and not chop it up and analyze it at all, because it is what it is. And for me, that's been one of the biggest lessons in talking about evolving. I would, by natural inclination, colour things with my own desire that they should be better than they were. Do you see what I mean?
What you're saying resonates with me a lot.
Yeah, and that it's not being true to what you're trying to perceive or what should be perceived by you. And until you can give that up, that idea that jumping to a conclusion or looking through rose-tinted glasses, you will never get the full value of perception. And one other thing I want to answer you, because it's something I've often noticed and wondered what to make of, which is that I also perceive by knowing where to put my hands. I just know. And I don't know how I know or who tells me, but I'll often start with a patient and I'll put my hands on, and after a short while, even some seconds, I'll know, okay, go there.
Would it be fair to say, and this is a much more shorter version of some of the things that really resonate with me, me personally, my experience, is this information that's coming into you. You're not passing it through any filters as much as humanly possible. You're not trying to color it with your own experience. And you're not trying to make it fit some formula that you learned from anyone.
Yes.
Because, and just I'm trying to see if this is what you're saying to me, if you start applying all these things that you think, then you're starting to create more litter of things that are no longer possible.
Yes, yeah.
And that you cannot, or what I'm thinking you're saying, is that you cannot begin to analyze perceptions that come in. They are just perceptions. and you want them in the fullest totality.
Yes.
Unedited, unchanged, unfiltered.
I completely agree. And I think that also ties in with the fact that when you approach a body to put your hands on and to palpate, you want that undisturbed and almost, you might say, untouched. If you could somehow touch without touching. I saw a picture once of a crocodile on a muddy bank of a lake or a river going into the water. I think it had seen prey or something. And it went down the bank and into the water, and there wasn't even a ripple. And I thought, that's how to put your hands on the body. And if you could do that without a ripple, you would also have honoured that need to perceive everything and not put your own colour on it, as you've said. Undisturbed physiology reporting itself in full to you. And the better we are at that, the better osteopaths will be, and that's a lifetime's work, isn't it?
I agree. Mr. Armitage, can you tell me about a case that went really well, but you really have no idea why it went well? Maybe you were just observing the case or involved in the case.
I find that with children, and the younger they are, sometimes things happen so quickly that it seems to be out of all proportion with what you did or thought. I mean, a child comes in, say, I'm thinking of one, and this is a while ago, but the mother's phrase sticks in my mind. How you get a baby that's got, let's say, colic and maybe a bit of symptoms of reflux, and they're screaming and yelling, and the mother is upset and all the rest of it. And there's been a difficult birth, or maybe it was an elective cesarean, doesn't matter. And you do something towards, it's usually very simple, the approach, and then it pays this enormous dividend where a mother said to me, "You've given me back my child." Because I think she sort of had a little window after the birth where she had a beautiful bonding with the baby, and then colic developed whole scale, and she felt completely alienated from this screaming creature she couldn't relate to, it couldn't console, and this went on, and the parents were all at their wits' end. And something happens. We don't know what necessarily. I might have had in mind, I'm treating the diaphragm, I'm decompressing the occipital condyles, I'm freeing up the RTM. But actually what seems to happen is some much bigger change, more comprehensive change, that changes the total health pattern. But I think it's not unusual, but maybe not so immediate. It's just when it's concentrated in a short space of time, it's dramatic and it jumps out at you. But I think we do the same for our patients, but perhaps it's in adults or in older children, it's spread out over a longer time period sometimes. It's not a very good answer to that question, I feel.
That's a good answer. Mr. Armitage, Dr. Still, Dr. Sutherland, and others have related a lot of aspects perhaps to God or to a prime mover. How do you see yourself, or do you see yourself as having some sort of role? And what is that role between yourself, the patient, and something else, be it a prime mover or something you could describe in religious terms or something you wouldn't describe in religious terms? But where is your role between that milieu, between the patient and something beyond them?
I always like Buckminster Fuller's way of speaking of the universe as not the universe, but universe. And he always spelt it with a capital U, universe. And so I don't doubt there is a creator of the universe, but I don't in some ways, I'll just go back to what I was saying earlier about alignment. And being in alignment with universe, in Buckminster Fuller's word, it puts you in a state of harmony and balance, by and large. And that's all that's required of you, is to be listening to what your alignment, in the biggest sense of the word, should be. So you've asked about my role, or how I see my role in that process to help a patient to regain. It's like regaining. I think we weren't short of it when we came into the world, and then we kind of learnt our way out of that, and learnt how to be at odds with the universe, and to lie across the flow instead of lined up in it like a trout or something in a stream that keeps perfectly still, apparently, with just a little flick here and there, and looks so effortless. Whereas when you're crossways to the flow, you're getting battered all over the place and thrown around. And I don't make distinction between my role as practitioner and all of those levels that there might be, from the simplest thing of taking the big toe and making it more comfortable, right up to realigning yourself with the universe. I think in some ways you never know if, as you made the big toe more comfortable, the whole thing might realign. And if you had, in my mind at least, if you had grandiose ambitions, it might be to the detriment of the patient and nothing would happen anyway. Whereas if you just retain an open mind, obey what you see as the necessity, you'll be doing the right thing in that relationship. You won't go wrong. And you don't have to make it into something extra. Do you see what I mean?
It just is what it is.
It already is something extra, as well as perhaps something small too.
If I were a student and you were my tutor, and I was relatively inexperienced, so you're giving me all the start-off rhetoric that I might hear, and you were going to tell me about the good old days of osteopathy.
Right.
You know, it used to be this, it used to be that.
Right.
What might come out of your mouth if you were talking about the good old days of osteopathy?
My good old days, as
Your good
opposed
old
to
days.
Still's good old days.
Your experience of it.
Yeah. I think it must be much different in the US because of a whole different history and development. But in England, at any rate, the thing about the good old days of osteopathy, where they were completely unregulated, and anyone could call themselves an osteopath, and that had its drawbacks. But the one thing that was good was the freedom to practice exactly as you saw fit. And to me, when I look at students nowadays, there's a kind of fear factor has entered into their thinking. They're looking over their shoulder, at the osteopathic regulatory authorities, and their hand on the shoulder, which isn't always benign, to say the least. And they're also looking over their shoulder at medicine and this whole school of thought of evidence-based medicine, which I don't think fits well with osteopathy at all. And we were free of all that. We were a small, unsupported profession of individualists. And the freedom to express yourself, if you like, in your work was a given. You didn't have to fight your corner and sort of make it possible for yourself. It was more or less you could practice to your heart's desire without asking anyone's permission.
What encourages you about osteopathy today?
I think what encourages me the most is to see that there are still students just graduating from college who are as enthusiastic as we were, as uncorrupted by their education, so that they're going to be explorers. We probably see more of them at the OCC than maybe other places, but I think there's still a tremendous desire that osteopathy should continue, that it exists and should continue and the spirit of it be true to how it is. And the other thing that's encouraging for osteopathy on this side of the Atlantic is how Europe is developing and how osteopathic schools are springing up, and some of them may be of not very high standard, but the impetus is there. And when I was training, you could say there were no osteopaths except in England and France and Belgium. Now virtually every European country is in on the act, and we're seeing more and more Europeans appearing on our courses, and I think that's a great encouragement as well. And also in some of these environments, it seems to me it feeds back at that old feeling of freedom that we spoke about. When it's new, it's fresh, and people can take an uninhibited, unfettered view of it. And surprising enthusiasm, and it's like a fresh spring you just dug out, and it's shot out of the ground, and there it is, and it's beautiful. So that encourages me too.
Do you think that passion is necessary to do what you do?
Yep, I do. But a kind of disciplined passion, I would say, if that's not a contradiction in terms. Because I think I do feel passionate, but passion that kind of spills over into unbalanced is not, you can't bring that to the treatment table. You cannot and shouldn't. But I think being passionate about the subject and about, say, the teaching of it and the spreading of it is great. But passion needs to quiet down at the table side.
What are you discovering at this time in your life? You've invested time in the United States, so much time here in the UK, a long time at the OCC, and you're now about to pick up and move to another country. Could you describe a little bit about what you're discovering about that experience?
People say to me, "Oh, you're moving to Portugal. Oh, so you're retiring then?" And my immediate thought is, osteopaths don't retire. You feel, how could you, in a way? How can you retire? Because what exactly are you retiring from? Are you retiring from having a pair of hands? No. Are you able to take a gift you've been given and bury it? No. Are you going to not pass on what you know? No. So I guess what I'm discovering is that I still love osteopathy, in a word. And I don't. I think I've said to patients before, 28 years and counting, and never been bored. It's not quite true. Maybe there have been times when I might have stifled a yawn, but perhaps I was tired. But it's near enough to the truth that I find day-to-day work with patients as interesting as it ever was. And in a way, when you have a discontinuity, like you're going to move, it does make you think about what you're doing and what you've been doing, and do you want to change some aspects of it. And I've been surprised to find, not necessarily, maybe work a little less, I don't know, but beyond that, carry on.
Mr. Armitage, do you have when a patient has been treated by you, is there something that you would like them to experience or to know or to remember as a result of being treated by you? Or is there a feeling that you wish them to have?
No. I couldn't say. I mean, that's for them in a way, not for me. Because I don't know what happens when they walk out the door. And I trust that something good will happen for them, either then or cumulatively if you've seen them more than once. But I don't know that I ever have the sense that I ought to shape what is going to happen. I almost think that's a mistake to try to do that. It's like, I think there's a paradox in our work, that if you desire the outcome, it's yet another filter that cuts across clear perception, but also clear action. Because if you think that the result of this particular still point, say, ought to be that those structures where you'd perceived lack of movement ought to move easier, you've already prescribed the result. And you don't know what the result would be. You shouldn't even want to know before you see it what the result will be, because that's the body physiology at work, that's potency and intelligence with capital P and capital I at work. It's none of your business to dictate the result, I feel. So I think the answer is no.
One last question, Mr. Armitage. If you had just one last story that you'd like to share or to tell about a patient, about yourself, about life, what would it be?
Well, something sprung to mind. I don't know why, so I may as well tell it. I've told it before, and it has a moral. And it was in my early days in practice. I was working in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was treating a child that had had meningitis at the age of, say, 6 months. I can't remember exact detail. It's a long time ago. And had been comprehensively and severely brain damaged as a result. And the mother had told me that one of the things she would like to achieve was that the child shouldn't startle so readily and, should be a little bit more tranquil and calm if possible. And I think his sight had been very badly affected, and he was, if not totally blind, then, as near as makes any difference. But his hearing was quite acute, and she was thinking that he was perturbed a lot of the time, not only by loud sounds, but small sounds, and therefore very hard to settle, hard to put to sleep at night, and more agitated and upset than he might have been. And I was working with him one day, and I had drifted right inside his mechanism, and there I got lost, so to speak. I was really not aware of myself or my surroundings or anything much until I appeared to have been simultaneously hit on the head by a sledgehammer and struck by a lightning bolt. And I jumped and came to, as it were, and quickly sort of played it back. And what the hell was that? And what it was, the air conditioner in my office had switched on. And this was the shock produced in the child by the sound, this little sound, and like that. And it was such a lesson to me. Don't go drifting around in people's mechanisms without staying still within yourself. And B, just an amazing gift, really, to experience from within that child's world what he was living through, with every sound that he heard producing a potential for a shock, and just what it felt like to be immersed in that and unable to apply the filters that we all apply to damp down all the input into our central nervous system. It was one of the biggest osteopathic lessons ever, and ever since that day I've been sitting still within myself, and I don't go drifting around in people. And why that story came up in response to your question, I don't know. But there it is. That's what my unconscious threw up, so there it is. That's the answer.
Mr. Armitage, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure being with you and talking to you.
It's been fantastic.